What's up, guys? My internet keeps dying. I was in the middle of doing the video. I'd given out a lot of good information, but what can you even do about that? I'm just going to go over what my plays are today really quickly because I just don't want to deal with this right now. I just can't deal with this right now. College basketball, of course, we saw UConn score 30 straight points in the game at one point yesterday across halftime, which is just ridiculous. Starting the two halves, Illinois had a span of 11 and a half minutes combined starting the first half and the second half where they didn't even score at all. It was just, the game was at UConn's preferred pace the whole time, slowing the game down, a grinding defensive game. Congratulations to UConn. I guess they easily won to get to the Final Four. They're probably going to easily win again against Alabama. So UConn again gets to avoid good teams. They get to avoid Auburn. They get to avoid Arizona, avoid North Carolina. Congratulations to Alabama. Alabama was able to make a nice comeback against Clemson. Clemson was playing a good defensive game early in the game yesterday. And it looked like the game was more to their pace early, but Alabama was able to turn it on, start hitting a bunch of threes, and they were able to do it, make the comeback and do it to win the game and get into the Final Four. So congratulations to Alabama, where they are a huge underdog against UConn. UConn's just a huge underdog constantly. Today, Tennessee, Purdue, I call that game the Loser Bowl because those two coaches have both been some of the biggest losers and underperformers in tournament history. Their tournament track record is so bad, but one of those teams has to win. I think it's probably going to be Purdue. Purdue, they're a little bit public, but they do have the cash discrepancy on them as well. 76% of the cash as opposed to 71% of the tickets. They're up from 3-3 with juice, really. And if you look at the other time these teams played this year, Purdue won by 4, but Tennessee was jacking up an insane amount of threes, like 30 threes, and that is not a recipe to win. Just jacking up a ton of low percentage shots. You kind of have to get lucky and hit a bunch of them, whereas Purdue was just dominating in the paint. So that makes it look like Purdue probably has a matchup edge in this one here. So I would lean to Purdue to get through in this one. Matt Painter, I mean, yeah, you joke around about him. He's never made a Final Four. This is probably the best team that he's had, though, at Purdue. And maybe they're a little bit more motivated because they've lost 3 straight tournaments that have been bounced by a double-digit seed, including the 16 seed Fairleigh Dickinson last year. So maybe a little bit extra motivation on their side. Would be hilarious if they wind up matching up with NC State, though, in the Final Four, and NC State bounced them as a double-digit seed again. That would be ridiculous, but probably not going to happen. But I would lean to Purdue. Rick Barnes just is a massive underperformer in the tournament. He's now 5-18 with a win against Creighton against the spread. He's 5-18 against the spread, I believe, in his tournament career. And in, I believe, 18 tournament appearances or something like that, he has only made the Elite Eight twice and never made the Final Four with Texas and Tennessee. So they just constantly underperform. And Tennessee a lot of times loses as a favorite. The game I'm going to be on is going to be to lay the points with Duke. They're down from 7.5 to 7. So we're getting some nice line value on Duke, in my opinion here. 65% of the tickets on NC State and 59% of the cash on them. So cash discrepancy going against NC State, but they are also the public team. They look like a pretty public square underdog with the way they've been playing recently. I think people are going to look at them and look at how, NC State upset Duke in the ACC tournament. They beat them in the ACC tournament when Duke was an 11-point favorite or something like that, and now they're only 7. Both those games are a neutral location game. So what has changed to make the line move 4 points towards NC State besides the fact that NC State just looks good recently? Nothing has really changed. The teams are still the same teams, so I think it's an overreaction in the line to recency bias. And Duke played at NC State about a week before that, and Duke was like a 6.5-point favorite in that one. And I believe Duke didn't win that game by that much. I think they only won by 5, so NC State covered. I'd have to go look at that. So the public might be coming in and looking at that and say NC State played a close game in that one too. And maybe it's kind of the fact that Duke does play a slower style, so they don't tend to cover large numbers. So that does scare me a little bit. And maybe NC State has a little bit of a matchup edge in some ways where they can hang with Duke in some ways. But I just think there's too much line value here, man, and I think it's got to just run out for NC State at some point here. Duke was, a 6.5-point favorite on the road at NC State, and now it's almost the same number on a neutral site Nothing that much has changed, so I'm going to lay the points with Duke. NC State coming off another game where they just pulled off another upset. They've won whatever it is, 9 straight games or something like that. 7 of them as underdogs. I think it's something like that. But leading into the ACC tournament, they lost 8 of their last 10 or something like that and lost 4 straight. So, they've gotten hot at the right time for sure, but the team isn't a different team. So I think something's got to happen where they're probably going to run out and not continue to be able to do this. And especially they're coming off a win where they looked really good against Marquette and beat them by, I don't know, what did they beat them by? Almost double digits or something like that. Marquette just had a really bad shooting performance in that game. Un-Marquette-like, and they were taking bad, low percentage shots too in that game. So not a good performance from Marquette. Duke played a much uglier style game, even though it was a big win over Houston. They beat the 1 seed, but that's much less of an upset. We know it's much less of an upset than NC State beating Marquette, so I don't think there's any letdown type of spot here, even though it was beating the 1 seed. That was a shorter line than the NC State Marquette game was, so Duke's upset was milder, and the game looked uglier. It was a game played in the low 50s, which is really crazy. That's Houston and Duke both play slow styles, and Houston lost their best player to injury in the game, Shed, which I think helped Duke get through that. I think Duke probably would have lost that game if Shed did not get injured. So Duke maybe feels a bit lucky that they're even here, and maybe that'll motivate them a little bit. I think they're going to also be extra motivated just because they lost that recent game to NC State and didn't play that well, I think, at NC State. So Duke is going to have the adjustments to make in this one too. So I like that aspect of it too. Duke -7, going to the NBA, going to be on the Knicks -3.5. It looks like they're up from 2.5 to 4 now. They have 61% of the cash on them, but 88% of the tickets over on the other side on the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder getting the public action, even though they were without SGA again. He is doubtful. I think he's probably not going to play. The line is lined like he's not going to play, because otherwise the line would not be telling you that the Knicks are the slightly better team. The line would probably be, it would probably be closer to a pick'em, maybe, even if SGA was playing. But I believe he is not going to play. He's going to miss his 3rd straight game. I've had a decent read on the Thunder after they were my nemesis for a while during the season. They were just covering in all these bad spots where they shouldn't have been covering. They were still covering. But now I've actually won on their last 2 games, where I went against them with the really hot Rockets team, got that win in. I went on the Thunder in their next game, which they won both of those games without SGA. They were able to come back and play a nice game, winning over Phoenix by 20-something points without SGA. That's a big win. Thunder are still in the battle to try to get the 1 seed, which, that's going to motivate them a bit, battling to get the 1 seed in the West. But the Knicks are battling for seeding, too, and it might matter a little bit more to the Knicks because they're battling to maintain the 4 seed, which would mean they host a playoff series, which I think matters a bit more, especially if they're opponent is going to be the Orlando Magic, who are in the 5 right now. The Magic have a big home-road dichotomy, so that's a series where you'd really want to be the home team rather than the road team. So I think that matters a little bit more. So both these teams battling for playoff seeding, but maybe the Knicks wanting to get that first round home series matters even a little bit more. And I like the situation the Knicks are in better, man, even though they're returning home from a road trip. It is a short road trip, and the Thunder are actually starting a road trip. So usually it's a spot where I'd want to be on the team starting the road trip because they tend to be focused, but the Thunder are coming off a huge Western Conference win over Phoenix, so it could be a bit of a letdown spot, whereas the Knicks, I think they're in a focused spot, even though they're returning home from a road trip, because to end that road trip, it was only a 2-game trip, so not a long road trip. Might not be the home distractions coming into play because the Knicks just lost as a favorite in overtime to the San Antonio Spurs as an 8.5-point road favorite. That's a bad loss, man. That's an ugly loss, losing to San Antonio. So I think the Knicks are going to be angry about that, and I think they're going to be focused, and they have a really good team in the Thunder coming into their house, so they're going to be focused for those reasons, I would have to think. You got a good team coming into your house, you're battling for playoff seeding, and you're coming off an ugly loss. So for all those reasons, I like the New York Knicks, minus the 3.5. I think you can still get out there. Moving to the MLB, I got 3 plays. First play is going to be on a team where this line has really been crashing. It's going to be on the LA Angels, the Anaheim Angels, the LA Angels of Anaheim, getting plus 125, I think now, something in that range. They're a decent sized underdog still, but the line has crashed on Baltimore down from 170 to 144. So it looks like there is some significant money coming in, pushing the line towards the Angels. And I do agree with it, but I don't know why the line has moved that significantly. But we can still get a decent underdog price. I wish we got in a little earlier to get a little bit of a better underdog price, but it does look like the market is signaling on the Angels to the point where the line has really crashed. And I don't think an injury in the MLB is even really going to affect the line like that because, like, you know who the starting pitchers are, so they're not injured. And if, like, a hitter is injured in baseball, that has much less of an effect than basketball and, like, a quarterback in football would, because this is a sport where you have a 9-player lineup. I mean, one hitter being out isn't going to matter as much, really. So, and a lot of it is dependent on the pitching matchup, but obviously, like I said, we know who the pitchers are. And I think there was a hidden edge in the pitching matchup in this one. You do have Baltimore with 88% of the tickets, so they are public, but 91% of the cash. Don't think that is really accurate, that they do have the cash discrepancy like that, because something is moving this line in the other direction, having it crash, like I said. So, and I do agree with where it's moved, so I don't think that cash discrepancy is even accurate. I do agree with this. This is one of the types of pitching matchups where I kind of like it, because you look at the pitchers' just overall stats and think that the advantage is on one side, but then if you dig deeper into their stats, you might find that there's actually an advantage in the pitching matchup on the other side. So you got Baltimore has Tyler Wells, really good numbers last year, a sub-1 whip with a 3.64 ERA, really nice numbers. Decent strikeout numbers as well. Not great, but pretty good, pretty decent. So guy comes in, is hard to hit. His ERA was a little bit higher the previous couple of seasons. He's only had 2 full seasons as a starter with Baltimore. He's a somewhat young guy, but he started his career a bit late. So maybe not a guy with completely overpowering stuff, but definitely good numbers. But then if you dig a little bit deeper and you look at his numbers against the Angels, it doesn't look as good. They're 7 for 23 off him lifetime, a 304 batting average. This is the hitters that the LA. Whenever I talk about the opposing hitters against the pitcher, I'm talking about specifically the hitters that are on that current team. So I don't look to say how is this player pitched against the Anaheim Angels, because their personnel might have completely changed in the last several years. In this case, maybe not, because he's only been in the league for a few years. But I like to look at who are the actual current hitters, because that's really what you want to look at. How did these specific hitters match up against this pitcher? And it looks like they do pretty well against him, man. So that doesn't look good for Wells. So his overall numbers are definitely really good, or were good last year, but looking at his stats against the Anaheim Angels hitters that they currently have, not so good. And then on the opposite side, it actually looks to be completely in the other direction as well. Reed Detmer's pitching for the Anaheim Angels. His stats didn't look good last year, especially a 1.35 whip. That's not very good. His ERA in the mid-4s, very mediocre, but maybe indicative that his ERA should have been a little bit higher last year. But the year before that, which was his full first season with Anaheim, he's a much younger guy. His first full season was also last year. It was also the year prior to last. His stats were actually better that year. His strikeout numbers actually went up last year, but his walk numbers went up. His walk numbers have really been the problem, because his strikeouts per 9 were really good last year. So that tells you that he has good strikeout stuff. It's just that he walks too many guys. He's too wild, and that's something that is fixable. So I think that Detmer's, there might be a hidden edge here, because he actually might have the better stuff than Wells does, even though Wells' stats, his numbers looked better on the surface with the ERA and stuff. But looking at Detmer's ability to strike guys out, I think he actually has the edge with his strikeout potential, his potential to overpower hitters. And looking at his numbers against Baltimore specifically, even though Baltimore has some pretty good hitters, they are 8 for 45 off him lifetime, only a 178 batting average. So they've struggled to hit Detmer's. So I like that. So I think there's a hidden edge there for those reasons. So I like the LA Angels in this one. My plays are all going to be on the full game in this one. And I think we're getting maybe a little bit of an edge on the line as well, even though the line has crashed now, because the Orioles have looked totally dominant in the first 2 games, winning those 2 games by a combined score of 24-7, a football score. They've scored 11 and 13 runs against against the Angels. So Baltimore just looks like they're completely wiping them out. So who in their right mind is going to want to come in and play the Angels here? It almost looks like it's a bargain to lay the price with Baltimore here, with what appears to be the better starting pitcher. And obviously Baltimore is the better team. And maybe you could even argue that Wells is indeed the better of these two pitchers. But with the way these guys match up against these opposing lineups, I think that the edge actually goes to Detmers, and I think he is the better strikeout pitcher, and that's where I tend to look. And like I said, I think there just might be a little bit of an edge just because Baltimore's won so easily in the first two games. And maybe Baltimore just gets a little complacent because of that too. And Anaheim, a lot of times you see this in baseball where when a team has lost the first two games of a 3-game series, or they only have one game left in a series and they're trying to avoid the sweep, they tend to have a little bit of extra motivation there to try to get that win. Nobody wants to get swept, especially in the opening series. So maybe there's a little bit of a motivational aspect there on the Angels as well. I'd probably like it a little bit more if I can't even talk. I'd like it a little bit more if Baltimore had a bigger series up next, and maybe they had a look ahead as well. They really don't. They're playing the Kansas City Royals next. Not really a look ahead, but still think this is a spot where we want to jump in on the Angels. So that's play number one. Excuse me. Play number two is going to be on, where am I? Am I on another AL game? I forget what I'm even on here. Yes, Toronto Blue Jays, which looks like I am siding with the public on this one, but this just looks like it is a big mismatch, man. This is Kevin Gausman against Sean Armstrong. Toronto against Tampa. Toronto's flipped from an underdog to a road favorite from plus 105 to minus 118. I think minus 118 is the best you can do, but a short favorite price I still think is a little bit of a bargain there where you're basically just still pick the winner type of situation there. Almost like towards like a pick 'em, which would be like minus 110. Basically, it's almost like a line that's close to that. 80% of the tickets are on Toronto, though, so they are public. But also 96% of the cash and the line is moved on them, so it does look like there is professional action or respected money coming in on the Toronto side. I mean, in baseball, you don't see the public getting involved nearly enough in baseball to really move a line at all. So if a line's moving in baseball, it's probably because there's some information coming in, and or it has to do with the fact that respected bettors are coming in on that side. And I think that might be the case here. It looks like we're getting a cheap price with Toronto, man. I think this is a big mismatch with Gausman pitching for Toronto. But, I mean, he's just obviously good. Everybody knows how good he is. He had a really good whip last year, 1.18, 3.16 ERA. Really good season for him. It was one of his best seasons of his career, really. Back earlier in his career, his whip was a little bit higher. He seems to be a bit better now. Like he's always been a pretty decent strikeout pitcher. He's been a bit wild. That's kind of been his issue. But his strikeout walk numbers have actually been better the last couple of years. The year before that, it was actually really, really high, where he really got his walk numbers down. His strikeout numbers were sky high. His strikeout numbers are really high the last two seasons. His walk numbers weren't that bad last year either. So even though he's in his early 30s, his last two seasons with Toronto, maybe they have some good like pitching coaching there or something, but he's been quite good, although his whip was a little bit higher in 2022 because of the extra walks. But he's been tough to hit, man. He's been a guy that's come in and had a lot of strikeouts, which again is something that I like. Guy that can come in and really kind of overpower some hitters. And against Tampa Bay's hitters, we got a decent sample size here, too. Tampa Bay's hitters are only 11 for 61 off him, lifetime, a 180 batting average. So he's really held Tampa Bay's hitters down. They've really struggled against him, so I like that. I think they've really got an edge there. Whereas Sean Armstrong, he's a guy who's in his 30s as well for Tampa Bay, but looking at his stats lifetime, he's just kind of a journeyman pitcher. He's been all over the place. He's been mostly a reliever. He only has 9 career starts, and they've all come in 2022 or 2023. He's actually made 1 relief appearance already this season. So he's basically a reliever for almost his entire career, and he's coming in and making a spot start here, I guess. I don't know if there's an injury or what, but that's not the type of guy that I want to be on because usually they don't have the ability to go deep into games. So I think this is a big mismatch here with Gausman, a really good starter, up against Armstrong, who's basically a career reliever, and his numbers in his career aren't really that good either, with an ERA of over 4, 1.28 whip, not really that great. He's had some pretty questionable numbers in some of his seasons there. It's just, a guy, him being a starter like this, not really a situation where I'm going to want to jump in on a guy like this. I'm sorry. And then looking at his stats against Toronto, oh boy, it gets even crazier. Toronto's hitters They have some good hitters on the team. They're 20 for 49 off them lifetime, man. A 408 opponent batting average and 8 walks and 8 strikeouts. So he's struggled against them, man. With a 1-to-1 strikeout walk ratio. That's pretty ugly, man. They've been able to hit him. He's struggled pretty badly against these Toronto hitters. So I think this is a mismatch. And looking at how these teams have done recently against each other, the Tampa Bay has won the last 2 games of the series after Baltimore won the openers. This is a 4-game series. So maybe maybe Toronto has a little bit of a motivational edge here. They want to even the series again and not lose the series 3-1. So I don't know if that'll motivate them a little bit more, or maybe give us a little bit of extra value on Toronto because Tampa's won the last 2 games. I don't know about that, but yesterday's game got heated, though. So both of these teams are probably going to want to show up and play here today. There was a brawl yesterday, and Cabrera on Toronto, got thrown out of the game. And then, of course, when you're playing full game, you do have to look at the state that the bullpens are in, which I should go back and mention that for the Baltimore game as well. But you do have Tampa and Toronto. They both kind of used the same amount of relievers yesterday. They each used 4 relievers yesterday. They each used them. Rays only use them for 50 whatever pitches, and Blue Jays for 70. It's kind of like a wash. And the Rays did use like the back end of their bullpen because the game was a bit closer coming down the edge there. They had some of their better relievers come in, notching holds in the game. And then I don't know if Fairbanks is their closer or not, but he's the guy that came in to finish the game, even though they had a 4-run lead, so it wasn't a save situation. But I think maybe the edge for the bullpen goes slightly to Toronto. Again, a little bit, but I think both teams used some of their better relievers in the game yesterday. So kind of a wash there. And then looking at the Baltimore one really quickly, because I forgot to mention it, because full game, like I said, people tend to not factor in the bullpens nearly enough, and they just look at the starting pitching matchup. And yeah, you do have to weigh the starting pitching matchup heavily, but you do have to look at the situation the bullpens are in. And I also kind of think that's a wash as well. Each team kind of used their bullpens for like 70 or so pitches. Each team used their bullpens for 4 relievers in the game yesterday. Very similar kind of usage of the bullpens for Anaheim and Baltimore in that game. So I think the bullpen situation is just a little bit of a wash there. I mean, you do kind of want to take into account the specific pitchers that are available and which of those pitchers are better, but I don't quite go into that amount of depth. It tends to work out okay for me, so we'll see. Then we're going to the other series where I've actually been involved in every game in the series, the interleague series, and I've gone 1-1 in these 2 games. Texas is 2-0 in these games. They beat me once and they won for me yesterday. I'm going to go against Texas in this one on the Chicago Cubs. It does look like the line has moved against me, though, and the cash discrepancy is a little bit against me in this one, but Texas is public. I mean, they're the returning champs, and they're 2-0 in this series, so they're going to be public, and people probably prefer the known quantity in Texas' starter against the Cubs starter, who's more of an unknown. Texas is up from -130 to -139 on the money line. 84% of the tickets, 89% of the cash. So they're public, but they do have what looks like the cash discrepancy as well. I don't know if I guess I do maybe think that that's accurate because the line has moved in their direction, but I just don't agree with it, and I'm going to go against the public in this one. Like I said, perhaps the public does like the known quantity in John Gray pitching for Texas, who was, of course, on their staff last year as well when they won the World Series. And he had a really good season in his first season with Texas in 2022. But I think that was kind of more of an outlier because last year he wasn't as good with a whip of 1.29 and ERA 4.12. That was more in line with what his career numbers look like. That was very close to what his career numbers are. His career ERA is actually a bit higher than that, closer to the mid-4s, and his whip is around 1.13 as well. His whole career was in Colorado before Texas, though. In Colorado, you're pitching in thin air, so it's not pitcher-friendly at all. But Texas's park, I don't think it's that pitcher-friendly either, and you are facing some good offenses as well in the AL and in that division and whatever. So he had a better season. Maybe the coaching has been better. Maybe Texas is a better atmosphere for him. But his stats last year are more similar to his seasons with the Rockies. So I don't know what to take away from that. But he did have some worse seasons with the Rockies than what he had last year. But even so, I mean, he's a decent pitcher, but he does walk too many guys. I mean, that has also been a problem for him. His strikeout rate has been decent over his career. He is a decent strikeout pitcher, but a little bit wild, walking too many guys. And I'm actually going to wind up going against him here and looking at his stats. I mean, his stats are just okay, really, overall. But then, I lost internet again. This is fucking insane, man. I might have to go to my phone to actually look at this. Man. Yeah, this is the reason why I'm doing this on my phone with 5G, because it just kept cutting out. I'm sorry. I just kept losing it. I want to get internet back here so I can just reference these stats real quickly here. I don't know what I can do about this, but I do think the Grays' stats are worse than Wicks's are on the season. But Wicks I can talk about pretty quickly, because Wicks, the reason I'm going on him is because Texas has never faced him before. Last year was his rookie season. His season wasn't that great, but he's a guy that I think has potential, which is why I bet on him a couple of times last year, because I like betting on those like decent pitching prospects that come in and have their rookie season, and it's a situation where the opposing hitters have just never seen them before, so a lot of times these hitters don't really know what to expect, and seeing them in like a live game situation. Of course, we don't have actual footage on, we do have actual footage on Wicks now. We do have actual game footage on him now, so guys can watch what he was doing last year, but still that's different than like a live game situation where I think the pitcher does have an edge when the hitters have not seen him before. And I believe Wicks is also a lefty, which I mentioned this yesterday with Bradford, was that his name? Cody Bradford, in this same series on Texas. He's a lefty as well and had not been seen by the Cubs hitters before, and he had a pretty decent game yesterday overall. Usually when it's a lefty that hasn't been seen before, that tends to screw up the hitters even a little bit more. They struggle even a little bit more because the arm angles are just different as well. So having not seen him before, plus him being a lefty, tends to give that pitcher a little bit of an edge. And yeah, Wicks, I mean, his stats weren't that bad last year. I had my internet back now. 4.41 ERA, 1.27 whip. I mean, you'd want it to be a little bit better, but it was his rookie year. His strikeout rate, not that great, 24 strikeouts in 34.2 innings. So he only had 7 starts, though. So I don't know if his stuff is like, I think I looked at his scouting when he came in, and it was good enough that I wanted to bet on. So I think he does have decent enough stuff that he can perform pretty well against major league hitters. But his walk rate, he's got to get down. He walked 11 batters last year. That was really the worst of what his stats were last year. The walk rate's got to come down, which I think that's fixable, especially when that was his first year. You could say that maybe it was him getting, acclimated to the major leagues. So maybe he'll start improving to and maybe really come into his own. And then going back to John Gray really quickly, looking at his stats against the Cubs hitters, they've seen him a bunch of times. They've seen him 63 at bats worth, and they've hit him okay. They're 17 for 63 off him, 270 opponent batting average, and he's had 7 walks against them with 15 strikeouts. So the 15 strikeouts are pretty good, but 7 walks, not good. He's struggled against them, and they've been able to hit him a decent amount, and he's been a little bit wild against them too and walked them a decent amount. So I'm going to be on the Chicago Cubs in that one. And of course, like I said, maybe we're getting even a little bit of extra value here because Texas are the returning champs, and they've won both games in the series and won yesterday 11-2. So maybe a little bit of value going against them here as well. Texas, it's possible that the Cubs are going to be a little bit more motivated too. Like I said, I think all the teams that I'm playing on today are teams that are trying to avoid sweeps. So they're in that avoid sweep situation, and I think they have a little bit of a pitching edge. So we get a nice combined situation. Oh, that's not the case for Toronto. Never mind. Toronto won the first game of the series. Excuse me. They lost the most recent 2. So they're trying to even back to an even series and split the series. But these other 2 teams are trying to avoid the sweeps here. And Texas, who do they have up next? They have Tampa Bay up next. So is that going to be a little bit of a look ahead? That's a big American League matchup. And it is, I believe, a rematch of the playoff series last year. But Texas, of course, won the series against Tampa. So it might mean a little bit more to Tampa. But hey, I'm going against Tampa today, aren't I? I forgot to even mention that. I forgot about that aspect of it. Tampa Bay, yeah, they're playing a divisional game, and it was a heated game yesterday, so it's not like they're going to quite overlook Toronto, but they are up 2-1 in this series, and they do have Texas up next, and that is going to be a revenge type of situation for Tampa because Texas was the team that eliminated them last year, eliminated them last year. I'm going through puberty live on video. Texas is the team that eliminated Tampa Bay last year, so maybe Tampa will have an even a little bit more of a motivational aspect to it there. Tomorrow, who knows? And maybe, I don't know if that would be cause for a little bit of a look ahead for Tampa as well. I don't know. But back to Texas Cubs. This is also a full game play where I don't think the bullpens are really in that much of a different spot either. I mean, Texas used their bullpen a little bit less yesterday. They used them 50-something pitches, and actually Cubs used theirs for 80-something pitches. So that's not as good, but I mean, I guess, well, we'll see. The game was a bit closer, so both teams kind of used some of their better relievers, so the number of pitches maybe doesn't matter quite as much. The Cubs did use one guy, Brown, for 44 pitches worth, and they just let him get rocked. They just let him lose the game, basically, and give up 6 runs, so I don't know. So maybe saving a little bit of their bullpen by just letting him stay in there a bit longer and use up some pitches there. So the number of pitches, I think doesn't matter as much as the number of pitchers who were used, and both of these teams used the same number of relievers. And Texas did use some of the back end of their bullpen because the game was closer. Even though I was on Texas, and I do think I still got the game right. The game was 5-2 in the 8th inning, and the game just unraveled with Brown, and they're giving up a 6th spot to Texas there in the 8th inning. Texas had some guys in there, some of their better relievers, notching holds in the game before that happened, and then they wound up in a situation where there was no longer a save situation, and they had a big lead by the end of it. That's going to do it for me, man. Hopefully still some good information. Bunch of games today. We got 5 games. We got in Major League Baseball because these games are the earlier games. They're all in the afternoon. LA Angels of Anaheim plus 125. Toronto Blue Jays minus 118. Chicago Cubs plus 122. College basketball trying to get back. Well, I'm even in the tournament right now. I think I'm 3-3, so I want to win overall in the tournament, man. So let's not fall below 500. Let's fall into a win here. Let's get back above 500 in college basketball. Excuse me, and be on the winning side of the NCAA tournament again with Duke -7, and over in the NBA, the New York Knicks -3.5. That's going to do it for me, man. Peace.